Here we are, we're in Barkersville, New York, Barkersville Cemetery, the Carpentier plot. Just outside the plot, you'll see there's a pretty good sized headstone saying Carpentier on it. Behind that, you can see the plot. We're going to go inside and I'll explain a few things. The first stone you see when you enter the little gate there is this little one. Now, it's a memorial to Alice and Charlie Waite's kid, not even sure what sex it was, died apparently in infancy. Next stone, we got Charlie Waite and Alice Loomis. Alice Loomis was Horace's niece. She was a favorite of Horace, and you can tell this because she lived with him for a while. Charlie and Alice both lived there. Charlie was a Civil War veteran. He got home, apparently married Alice in the mid-1860s and went out to California. Charlie lived with Horace for a while. He worked in the telegraph office. He got in a little trouble with some of Horace's dealings. At one point, he was charged as an accessory to a homicide. No charges were ever proven or whatever. And shortly after that, he came back to New York right around 1870, 1871 or so. Next, you got Alice, the wife of Gilbert Loomis. So it says she was born. She was born in 1812, I believe. She was only 39 years old when she died in 1851, and she married a Gilbert Loomis. Obviously, their offspring was Alice Loomis, who's buried right next to him. Now, this stone here, biggest stone in the plot. This is a memorial to Horace's parents. On one side, you've got Henrietta, the wife of James Carpenter, died November 10th, 1841, age 59 years. On the other side, you have James Carpenter, and they'll tell you that he was born February 20th, 1771, and died October 3rd, 1858, and he was 88 years old. In front of this memorial, you have a little stone in honor of Stephen Ballard, who was Henrietta's father. Interesting enough, there's nothing for her mother here, simply her father. Don't believe he's buried here, just a memorial to him. And he was from New Hampshire. He was a doctor, and he was born in 1737. He died in 1827. Next to that, you get the other set of Horace's grandparents, Elisha Carpentier and Anne Freeman. And again, it's a little memorial to them right in front of the parents' stone. Next to that, and with a hell of a stone here, you got James S. Carpentier, Horace's older brother, or oldest brother. He was born in 1804, died in 1885. And interesting enough, they'll tell you right here, buried in Greenwood. So he's not here. He's actually in Brooklyn in the Greenwood Cemetery. It's a really, really nice, kind of a ritzy cemetery in Brooklyn. And that's where he is, along with his two wives. He had married a couple of sisters from Ireland, not at the same time. The first one died. It was Jane and Margaret. And he married Margaret first, I believe, Jane and Margaret Weir, and then married Jane Weir after Margaret's death. They both predeceased him, interesting enough, and he died a year or two after the second wife did. They had no children. Next is Anna Carpenter, and it's a stone for her. She's not here. She married an Edward O. Smith. She was born in 1809. She wasn't very long-lived. She died in 1841. Again, she died in Michigan, and it's just a memorial to her. Behind her is a memorial to her son, James Edward Smith. Now, he was born in 1834. He was born in Galway or Providence in this area. Went out to Michigan with the family. He was probably 2 or 3 years old, and he died out there in 1886. Now, James is mentioned in a couple of Horace's deals. Whether he actually went to California or not, I don't really know. I believe he probably did, but again, we don't know. And what I find interesting, not only with James, but in other people's histories, when you start looking it up, James married an Emmeline Husted. Now, she was from Galway, or the Galway area, Now, James was in Michigan. She was here. I don't know if he came back a few times, if it was an arranged marriage, how the deal worked. But anyway, he was married to an Emmeline Husted. She predeceased James, dying a couple years before he did. They never had children of their own. They adopted a couple of children, and I do not know what happened to them. But anyway, here's James Stone. He's not here. He's in Michigan. Next to James, you got Reuben Carpentier, which is Horace's other brother, or another brother, I should say. He was a physician and a druggist. He's mentioned in at least one deal for Horace out in California. He might have been there. Basically, he had a practice in New York, but he is not in the New York directory for a couple of years at the same time that he is listed in a couple of Horace's deals out in California. So perhaps he did go out there and then came back. Again, he wasn't very, well, he was born in, I believe, in 1812, and he died in 1871. Now then, the next stone is probably one of the nicest ones in here, and this is for Edward. Now, this is Horace's brother. He was born in 1821, died in 1883. Edward and Horace teamed up in a lot of things out in California. Edward came out to Oakland probably a year or two after Horace did. He shows up fairly soon. Don't know exactly when he went out there, but him and Horace worked together in a lot of stuff. Edward also did stuff on his own. And interesting enough, Edward also apparently had a couple of children. It's a little sketchy. He might have been married the first time. He had a daughter, Cornelia, who was born in 1856, and she died in 1912, I believe. And he had a son who was Edward Jr., who was born in 1880, and he died in around 1943, I believe. He lived out in Santa Barbara, California. And basically, he was a playboy. He knew how to spend Horace's money and his father's money, and he was also a favorite of Horace's niece, Maria. And he inherited half of Maria's estate and stuff, so he was pretty well off. This, again, is Edward Carpenter's son, who was also named Edward. Now we'll go back here. Behind Edward Stone, I find this interesting. You have another stone that says, "A more honest-minded man I never knew." Now, there is some newspaper reference to that Edward was an extremely honest person, and it is in the newspaper, people saying that. So that's kind of neat. But what I find interesting about this stone is it's not centered. You can see the writing's like the way it is, and I would think if that's the only thing they were going to write, then maybe they would have centered it, but they didn't. Maybe that's the way they wanted it. I don't know. And then next to that, you have another stone. This is for Eli Ballard Carpenter. And basically, he was Horace's brother. He would have been born right before Edward. And apparently, he died pretty much in infancy. He might have been a year or two old. Now, at the end here, you have Horace's resting place. Now, this is fairly interesting. One, there's a legend here about how Horace came by the cemetery one day. They were working on the cemetery and they unearthed the stone. He liked it and he had planned to have it at his on his plot. So on the top of it, it's hard to see. It is carved HWC, and legend has it it's a stone that Horace picked out himself. Behind that, or up to the front of the grave, you got a little marker for Horace. Simply says H.W. Carpenter. And is, the year of his birth and the year of his death, 1824 to 1918. And then here you have Harriet Carpentier. Now, Harriet is a second cousin to Horace. We believe she moved in with the family right after Horace's mother died in 1841, or right around there. And she stayed with the family and then with Horace for the rest of her life. She was born in 1815, and she died in 1903. Like I said, she was with Horace, all his life, all his adult life for the most part. And she must have been, he must have held her at very close regards, because he's buried as close to her as possible. And again, on her stone, you can see just the initials that say HWC. I guess so. Everybody knew where to put Horace after he died. She predeceased him by 15 years, and Horace definitely wanted to be right next to her. Now, next to Horace, coming back this way again, you got Maria Hall. Now, Maria was was the daughter of Stokes and Sally Hall. She's also known as Rebecca. And she married late in life James Williamson. They were only married for about 12 years. James Williamson died in 1902. Maria was in a lot of deals with Horace. She must have been one of the favorites as well. And interestingly enough, it was her parents' house that Horace turned into the mansion. It's pretty much a legend around here. It burnt down in 1932, I believe. So it's not here anymore. But in the late 1870s, early 1880s, the legend has it that Horace spent about $70,000, $80,000 turning this house into his mansion. And interesting enough, he didn't particularly live there all the time either. He had another house in the village of Galway, which he seemed to frequent more often. I think the mansion was more for entertaining purposes, or for people to stay there for weeks, a couple weeks in the summertime to enjoy the cooler weather in Galway, as opposed to maybe New York City or whatever. So this is Maria Hall, and she was born in 1835, and she died in 1915. She was 80 years old. Next to her, you got Anna Hall. Now, Anna was Maria's sister. She died fairly young, and she's not really into any of Horace's deals or anything like that, but she's buried next to Maria. Then you got Sally Carpenter, Horace's sister, and Stokes Hall, her husband. Obviously, they were married. They had a couple of offspring, Anna and Maria, and that was, that's as far as the prodigy goes. But again, and it was Stokes Hall's farmhouse, probably the Hall farmhouse, that Horace turned into the mansion. Now over here in the corner, you have Robert F. Baptist. Now he was a longtime servant of Horace. He was a black man. He was probably born in around 1850, I believe. There's not a whole lot on him, other than he was with Horace for 40 years. At least. He shows up originally. He is a servant for Henry Herbert Byrne. Henry Herbert Byrne was a district attorney in San Francisco in the 1860s. And Henry Herbert Byrne was also a great friend of Edward Carpenter. As a matter of fact, they were probably best friends. They were in politics together in New York City back in the 1840s. And they had some dealings together out in California with, matter of fact, Edward even filled in for H.H. Byrne as district attorney on occasion. Now, Henry Herbert Byrne, it's an interesting story. He died in 1872. After his death, or right at his death, it found out that he had a secret marriage to an actress at the time, a Matilda Huron. And Matilda and Henry definitely got married, and they figure, I think it was 1854 or so. But then the marriage never got divorced or annulled or anything. Matilda remarried somebody else, and that marriage, I think, was divorced, but that ended in divorce. And then when Matilda heard that Henry Herbert Byrne had died, she came out to California to get part of his estate, or get the estate. She was in dire straits at the moment. Her acting career had waned, and Edward did settle with her and gave her, I guess, $5,000 or whatever, which wasn't a bad amount in the 1870s. But anyway, Robert F. Baptist first shows up as a servant for Henry Herbert Byrne in 1872, and then he ends up with Edward and Horace, basically for the rest of his life. Robert dying in 1917, the June 13th, which was really only about 6-7 months before Horace died. Now, another interesting thing that I find here is, we'll walk over to the end here. And over here, you have the final resting place of Gilbert Loomis. Now, Gilbert Loomis was Alice Carpenter's husband. Obviously, Alice died young. Gilbert remarried. He married a woman named Phoebe Hewitt. They didn't have any offspring, but he still must have been pretty much a favorite of the Carpentiers. I know James Carpenter lived with Gilbert and Phoebe up to his death. And anyway, Gilbert is just outside the Carpentier plot. You can see that. There's his stone. So almost a Carpentier, but not quite. And again, this is the Carpentier plot in the Barkersville, New York cemetery. And I hope I explained everything well enough.